introduction, Charlotte. I don't know if it's been an exciting time or a stressful 2 weeks moving over. Literally 2 weeks ago, I landed in the Bay Area. So I work for an Irish government agency called IDA Ireland. And I'm based here in our Mountain View office, working with companies on the West Coast that are looking to establish remote teams in Ireland, and also with companies that have already established teams in Ireland. So we partner with them to support them as they establish and grow their entities in Ireland. So perhaps I'll ask the panelists just to give a brief introduction to their organisations and their roles within those organisations as well.
Sure, yeah, I'll go ahead and start. So I'm the head of product design at Gainsight. Gainsight is a company without headquarters, so it was interesting because it was sort of founded half in India and half in St. Louis, and we've moved some more operations here to the US, but I've had two roles. In my current role, my entire team is in India, so I'm managing them remotely, and in my previous role, I was the product leader for a engineering team of a company that we had acquired, and they were in Tel Aviv. Prior to that, I worked at a company that was an 800-person company that was fully remote. So lots of different kind of experiences and perspectives on that.
Thank you. And Soren?
My role is SVP of Engineering at Zendesk. We used to be a startup just 10 years ago, setting up shop in San Francisco. And we now have 1,000 engineers globally. Oh, you can't hear it, sorry. 1,000 engineers globally. We have about a third of them in North America, a third of them in Europe, a third of them in APAC. The big development centers are San Francisco, Dublin, Singapore, and Melbourne. So we're probably a little different. Well, I would say we don't talk about remote development. We actually talk about global development, and we try to sort of normalize the whole thing. It really doesn't matter where you are, but we'll maybe get back to that.
Perhaps we could start with that point. Could you give us a sense as to where Zendesk remote offices are or global offices are, and like the metrics involved in selecting those locations?
So, like I said, we have about a third North America, Europe, and over in APAC. And the way we think about that is there's really two ways we get there. We started in San Francisco. A year or two into it, we said, it's really difficult to get talent in San Francisco. It's either expensive, it's scarce, whatever the reason is, right? Where can we go? The founders were from Copenhagen. That's a great place to start. We have heard that Dublin was a great place too. So we went there. We acquired a company in Singapore. We had a sales office in Melbourne. I mean, you can just add to the story here, right? That's how we got to 10 different places around the world. The thing we use as a recipe when we set up an office is we need a capable leader, we need a clear mission, and we need to have access to talent, and then there's a bunch of other details. But that's really where it starts. If we can't find a good leader, we don't even do it. Like, we don't have a model where people in San Francisco are managing individual contributors overseas and all that. It's always a senior leader and then a very clear mission about what that team somewhere in the world is supposed to do. It could be mobile, it could be our voice product, it could be chat, it could be whatever it is we're trying to do. And in those offices, we then put product management, UX, developers, the whole thing. So it's a self-contained unit. So really most of the communication we have is around what is the company goal, what are we trying to do from a strategic point of view, but the actual execution can happen on the ground in a very self-contained way.
Thank you. And I guess the same with Gainsight. What are the different criteria that you use when looking for locations for remote teams?
Yeah, I think, there are definitely different approaches, and I think some companies may say, like, we want to go global, but with us, the two founders of the company, they had founded a company before. One of them was based in St. Louis, one of them was based in Hyderabad, India, and they said, let's go for this again. I think there were some advantages, to hiring engineering, so the whole engineering function started out of there, and then there was kind of sort of a sales and customer function in St. Louis, so it was a nice synergy. But as the company grew, as many startups scale, they'll hire a different CEO, and they wanted more credibility in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, and so then we built out, that that part of the office. We have an office in London because we hit a certain level of revenue where we were ready to expand into the EMEA market. So that's when the London office opened, which is more of a sales office. Meanwhile, we were still hiring more talent in India, and that's how Bangalore office opened. And then the Tel Aviv presence was simply because we had acquired a company that was strategic. We were going from being a one-product company to looking for adjacent products that we could surround with ours. And this company happened to be in Israel, and so we said, great, the team is already there. We plan to maintain and keep this product, and so that was kind of how that formed. I think you have an interesting point about what's a global company versus a remote company. And in this case, I would consider Gainsight to be a very global company because we have these sort of different centers, and we do have a lot of employees that just work from home. But I think there is a difference to be noted between companies that are global with offices and sort of hubs, and companies that are entirely remote, and the dynamics that go with that, where everybody's in their living room and everybody's kind of working from their house and things like that. And
as Soren mentioned, your global hubs are cross-functional. Is it the same with Gainsight? Like that there's a number of different functions in each of the within the different global offices? Or is it more specific on certain roles go to certain offices?
I would agree. I would say yes, it's mostly like that. As I mentioned, like a lot of the sales functions need to be in certain cities. But when it comes to engineering teams, I think the only exception is the acquired company, because that company needed to be, like with any company or team that's acquired, they need some sort of glue to make sure that they're not having tunnel vision, connected to the broader vision. And I think having that lead in that office is very important, and usually that person will step up and take on the role of kind of communicating back, but it doesn't always happen that way. And so we did sort of bring a couple of people from our India team to work with that team, just to make sure that they were sort of aligned with some of the broader cross-functional initiatives, because we wanted to not only maintain the product that we acquired, but also integrate it into the core product. And I think it was really hard to integrate it into the core product without having stakeholders on that team that were there every day in the meetings, kind of with a goal to help that.
So another challenge you must face, you mentioned you manage a large team in India, so I would imagine time zone issues is something, a challenge, particularly with design teams. So how do you work around that, and how do you work around aligning those teams together, as you said, like cross-functional teams?
Well, I think Soren will probably have an even more like robust scenario with all the different development time zones, because for me it's fairly easy to I'm an early riser, so I have a preference. I think if you're going to be interacting with international team, you just have to know like whether you're going to be collaborating, like, are you okay with early mornings, are you okay with evenings, and then also figuring out like what does your team prefer. So I think one anecdote that I can mention is a lot of the time you're a busy person, you might cancel meetings on the fly, like something happens, it's a one-on-one, like no big deal, no specific agenda. But what I have to consider is like my team has a very difficult time getting to work because of the infrastructure. It takes an hour and a half from each way for many people to come into the office. And so if I ask them to do an 8 p.m. meeting, and then I cancel it like 5 minutes before, they've now waited 2 hours at the office. It's not like they're just getting along with their day and it's one meeting where they get a half hour back. So it's some of those like cultural nuances and details that I think are really important in kind of like maintaining some of the right spirit in those scenarios.
Right. I mean, I think this is where you see the difference maybe between a truly global company and a headquartered company. If all the meetings are scheduled in San Francisco time and never accommodating anybody else, well, that's probably going to be a signal that you're not really a global company. You're kind of a headquarter company. So I think a lot of those kind of things you really have to be sensitive to. So if you say you're global, then you actually are really global. I see us even still sometimes get caught in that, just because everybody see the world from their own perspective, right? So, like I said, we try to carve out the world, sort of the whole product we're building in ways where most things can happen on the ground, but of course there is collaboration between, the platform and mobile and, various other things. So we try to find offices where there is some overlap in business hours. So I think it is a bit of an anti-pattern if there literally is 12-hour time difference between one office and another office that have to collaborate, because that's just not sustainable in my mind. That's going to be bad forever. There's nobody's going to change the time zones around the world, so it's not like we can say, well, in 2021 the world is going to be better. It's not happening. So I would avoid those kind of things. I know it's not easy, but if you have a chance of building up a company, I wouldn't design for that. Sometimes you acquire a company and you just have to figure it out, and maybe one of the solutions are, over time you move some things out of that place, or you consolidate things, because you have to come up with something that's sustainable, I think.
And I guess that kind of leads on to like a common question in this area is, how do you manage the culture within remote teams? So how do you avoid the HQ versus remote team culture? Is there something that you have found that's kind of the most successful approach to managing this culture within your team members as they are spread across the globe?
Well, one thought that I have on that is there are many global situations that work. I think where culture can become problematic is if everybody's in one office except for one person and they feel like the odd person out. For example, you have when you're having meetings or brainstorms and you forget to dial that person in. Like, that can just be really, and it's not really anybody's fault. You're kind of there, you're in the moment, and you forget. But that's when it probably becomes problematic. So it's more on that tone of like, is everybody on the same page? So that's one thing.
Right. I mean, communication is a big part of that. So making sure that the content you're sending, you're using in a town hall, all hands, is diverse. It's not, here's what we do in San Francisco, and let's celebrate that, and everybody else have to listen to that. If a lot of people are remote, what we do is every Monday morning we have a weekly engineering meeting where the whole organization can listen in on what's top of mind for me and my leadership. And the way we do that is everybody does it from a Zoom call in. There's no be up on a stage and talk to people. It's normalized. Everybody just calls in from the computer, including myself. So I think there's a lot of tricks like that where you can sort of normalize the thing about whether you're in headquarters or you're remote.
Yeah, one little thing that I thought of is we've started something where every time we get on a call, no matter who it is, we say good morning, good evening. Right.
And I guess kind of similar question, but for remote teams that have been acquired into the organizations, so how do you go about integrating those acquired employees and engaging them and onboarding them so that they're learning the values and the culture of your organizations?
We give them a big giant bear hug, and almost, I think it feels overwhelming. That's probably the honest answer. But I think we try to figure out what are the things that are sort of universal, that are worth hanging on to in our culture, and what are the new things that the company that we acquired is bringing in that we actually want to add on to our culture. And over some reasonable amount of time, we kind of balance it out and they get assimilated. So I don't know if there's an exact recipe other than a lot of it is people meeting people and kind of figuring it out. We went through an effort about 2 years ago where all of product development wrote down what we call our operating principles, which is kind of a layer on top of our company values, where we talked about how do we resolve conflict, how do we engage with each other, how do we have a respectful disagreement, and those kind of things. And that's sort of our global way of doing things. Below that, lots of rooms for individual teams and groups to have their own details around how they want to do things. But there are certain things that this is how we do things.
Yeah, on that note of like giving a big hug, and on the people note, this will probably may lead into another topic, which is around cost. We visit a lot. I go to India every 6 weeks. It's something I signed up for and agreed to and embrace as part of my job. And it's not cheap. Like, so there's one thing you can say, oh, fly everyone to HQ, you know, or get everyone together once a year, and that's important. That face time is important, but like showing that you're willing to go where they are and like, you're like, I'm part of your team, you know, I'm here to collaborate with you, I think is also like an important approach to consider.
It's a good point. What we do in my leadership team is every single quarter we meet as a leadership team to align, and beyond that we try to sort of be loosely tied together, and mostly the VPs do their own thing. But we always pick a new office every time we have one of those quarterly. So we spend the money, but we go and not just have our meeting and be secluded, but we actually go and talk to all the people that are in that local office so they feel like we actually care about what they do. And we take that feedback with us. The other thing about cost is sometimes what drives going overseas or outsource, whatever word you want to use, right, is cost. And it is a good thing. I have a budget too, so it is a thing that I have top of mind. But the thing you don't want to save is the budget that you have available to bring people together to do workshops and align on what the heck they're really trying to do. Because hiring the extra engineer, if you're not clear on what you're trying to do, the design isn't ready, it's a complete utter waste of money. Like, you're better off having, frankly, less engineers or less designers or less whatever.
Yeah.
You have to spend the money getting people together.
Yeah, and the sort of the lower cost outsourced teams, many times are contractors from a certain, from an agency, and there's less integration into that core culture anyway, and so it's just a trade-off to be made, I think, with any outsourcing, even if it's in even if it's local or in the U.S. with a contract agency, it's typically going to be a different product that you get in the end.
And moving on then to another topic around talent. So I guess with the increasing war on global talent and squeeze on global talent, as organisations seek to find the best employees globally, more organisations are adopting home working policies and remote workers working from their homes, kind of like the WeWork scenarios. Is this something, is this a model that you think is the way forward for organisations to win this war on talent, and is it a model that your organisations utilise to attract and to retain top talent?
I think people have to be conscious, and people have to be conscious when they take a job if they are a remote person and they're working from home. They should really think about what are the implications of that. Many people try working from home and they get depressed and isolated, and someone that I used to work with, he had a great quote. He said, all I have is a goal to have one meaningful interaction with a human per day. And so that was his way of staying sane, is he'd leave the house, he'd go to like a sandwich shop and like ask the person a question. And he's like, okay, cool. And that's like what kept him sane. But some people aren't happy in that environment. Another thing though is like, we can't have these scenarios where people have family situations. People need that flexibility, and there are a lot of people that are just being alienated by their companies that say, you must be on site every day, you have to be here for X amount of hours. There are plenty of talented people that just like can't do that, but they still want to work and they still want to be productive. And like, I think just from a human perspective, like it's an important thing to consider.
So I think like more and more, we're seeing people being recruited into organisations because of the talent, not where they are. So they can be remote, regardless of where they're actually physically based, they're being recruited. Is that a model that your organisations are beginning to adapt to or adopt?
Yes, definitely, for the reason that you mentioned. We're even thinking about whether we want to go as far as we have dedicated sort of remote teams, because actually, I caught myself. I shouldn't have used that word. Actually, I would say we're really trying to avoid sort of the idea of remote, because we want whether you're in the office or you're working from home, you need to be engaged and develop your skills and be in tune with what everybody else is doing and all those things. So again, if you work from home, if you're hired remote, it still needs to include that budget to travel once in a while to whatever your home team is, those kind of things. Because I think if we just hire people and we don't keep them engaged, they're going to lose out, we're going to lose out. And over time, they just kind of drift away from, you know, what the rest of the group is really doing, and their skills might be stale, and, you know, there's the social aspect of not really interacting with your peers and all that. So I would say that at this point we have some ideas of what we want to do, but we got a lot more work to do there. I don't think we as a company know exactly what that looks like at scale and to make it super productive, but it's something we definitely want to do.
And I know some of the drivers for setting up remote offices or global offices is driven by global growth, by the location of customers, by acquisitions. But then a lot nowadays is driven by the availability of talent as well. So, have either of you found it easier to set up a new hub in a talent where there is a talent cluster rather than to try and attract that talent back to your head office? Is it easier to set up where the talent is as opposed to trying to get that talent to move to where your head office is?
You might, there might be like where the talent is, but there also might be another thought, which is where the tech companies aren't. For example, like Gainsight has an office in Phoenix, Arizona. It's not like the biggest tech city. You know, I think Arizona State is there. So a lot of people go into sales jobs, but like typically they leave. And we had one of our former CMO move back there after being here for a while. And it was great because there were a lot of people that wanted the opportunity to work in tech and couldn't really find a job unless it was remote. So that strategy worked out really well for us. And I see some other companies doing that too.
I would say for us, it's a multi-prong approach. I mean, like I said, for every location we have, there's a main mission and a focus. So we will hire into that because that's what we need to do those things. But we'll also sometimes decide to go to a new place because it looks like maybe we could be the first kid in town, the coolest kid in town. We have set up shop over the last couple of years in Madison, for instance. You know, that's grown pretty big, you know, rapidly. It's not more than 7-8 years ago we hired our first person in Dublin, and that's now 400 people. So, you know, sometimes you do have to plant a new seed and just help nurture it to grow, you know, grow to something bigger.
Yeah, I think like in both Zendesk and Gainsight's cases, it's not that it happened haphazardly, but I think it's kind of letting the guard down around like these are the rigid reasons why we go into these specific places. It's like, yeah, maybe there was a dynamic person that could hire really well in this one city, so like let's try that. Or, you know, there's an acquisition here, let's try that. And maybe companies need to consider being a little bit more flexible with their reasons why they would, you know, open up these offices.
And I guess that kind of leads on to just the discussion we were having earlier about how you do actually go about setting up these offices. So like the actual logistics of setting up an entity in a remote location from your head office. So how have your organisations gone about that, apart from Zendesk, obviously using IDA Ireland when you established your Dublin site? But yeah, how do you go about that, and how do you go about recruiting your initial employees?
So, I mean, one way for us is obviously we do acquisitions. That's a huge jump start. But the other thing we do is when we decided to set shop up in Dublin, for instance, the most important thing for us was to finding that initial leader. So you ask yourself, how do you attract a very senior engineering leader to manage a team of nobody? Maybe with the goal of getting to 20. That's really difficult. So one of the tricks we used was we kind of propped up the job. We said, well, you can be the managing director for the country. You can build the whole office. You can, I mean, who knows, all the things we added to the list to make it sound good and, you know, all of that. So I think that was one of the tricks we used, like, you're going to play a bigger role than just managing developers or, you know, engineers. Like, there's a bigger role for you, so that's why this is attractive. I'm sure you can come up with some other ideas, but you have to think beyond what you're going to need the first 6 months or something, because if you're successful, you're going to need a lot more than, you know, a manager to manage those 10 or 15 people. Like I said, Colm Toomey, who was the guy we hired, he's still here 7 years later, and he's now managing a 400-person team. I don't think he ever imagined that when he got to the company.
You covered it.
And in terms then of, and we did touch on this briefly earlier, managing collaboration and working models. So, like, how do you manage remote agile teams when, you know, you're based here, San Francisco, but they are based globally? How do you manage that collaboration? What tools do you use to manage that?
Well, I think, so there's the software tools and then there's the operational tools. You know, this goes back to basics, but setting clear goals, OKRs, KPIs, whatever it may be for your organization, then everybody's on the same page. Me as a manager, like, if everybody that I work with is in front of me, I'm typically not the type of manager that asks for, let's say, a weekly report. I just talk to you. But in managing this team, I ask, and it's like the one thing that I require everybody to do is just send me every Friday morning, send me, you know, what happened this week, what's coming next, and is there anything else that we should know? Send it to me and a couple people. It's not a long thing, but it's a way to not just keep me in the loop. Like, I don't want to have to micromanage people. You know, I'm not gonna, like, you've heard these horror stories of people like setting up cameras behind people. Like, I'll never do that. But then it also gives that person a sense of accountability as well. Like, yes, I'm part of something and it's important what I'm doing. It's important to let people know about my progress.
Okay.
The only thing I would add, other than, you know, clear goals and all that, is a lot of communication, trying to make it asynchronous. I mean, a killer for teams that are distributed is really if everything have to be done in conference calls and, you know, everybody's waiting for everybody. So using Slack and, you know, various other things where things can kind of happen around the clock, even on different time zones, is super important. We sometimes get into somebody's waiting for somebody and things end up taking a long, long time. And so that's something that sometimes have to be debugged in the process.
Yeah, but like on the specifics of tools, or we'll call it a tool, like, if you're gonna have a global company, like, the company needs to make sure that there's like a functioning video conferencing system in the room. Like, people should default, as they, you know, when they go into meetings, default to thinking about, like, we just default to like thinking that there's gonna be somebody on the call, versus not, and then we, you know, remember, okay, no, it's just us, like, no problem. But it's just those, I mean, not just for efficiency, but like, you know, letting the teams know that we're all in the same kind of system.
Okay, and I think then just before we go to the floor for questions and answers, with the benefit of hindsight and from your experience in your current organizations and previous organizations, like, what are the pitfalls that you could advise some of the audience if they're considering going global or their first footprint out of head office? What would be the pitfalls to watch out for, or the red flags to keep an eye out for?
I just go back to the cost thing. Like, everybody thinks that if you have these global teams that you're going to save money. Like, you're not necessarily going to save money. You will be spending that money. If you want to run an efficient organization, you're going to be spending that money on travel, events, because we're all human, and like software to keep it afloat.
I agree 100%. That should not be the main driver. The main driver should be, what are we trying to accomplish and what are the best people we can put, you know, to that task. I do think I'm going to go a little bit around your question. I do think there's a benefit in global teams, by the way, which is if you're trying to build products for the global market, if you have a more diverse team in any possible way you can imagine diversity, you're going to be in a better position. It might feel a little difficult initially, but you're going to end up with a better product. I'm totally convinced of that. So the pitfalls are, you know, too much focus on just cost, not having great leadership, and not having clear goals. I mean, in some ways, it's all the things that could hurt you, even with a team that is one single team. It's just when you're in one single location, it's a little easier to make up for it. When you distribute out the teams, those gaps in process, communication, leadership is going to be, you know, much more clear to you.
And I think that out of sight, out of mind does apply. Transparently, sometimes when I do, a lot of what I do when I visit a global office is just chatting with people and having one-on-ones with people. One-on-ones with people that I wouldn't normally have those meetings with, but I think you have to have that personal interaction more. Otherwise, you're not going to find out, you know, what are their opinions on your team, or what are their thoughts about your performance, and then, you know, rumors or buzz can start to like emerge, because it's always, easy to look for someone to blame, and if they're not in the room, and that's, from a management perspective, like something that surprised me.
Okay, thank you both very much for sharing your experience, and I think that your insights have been very informative. So I'm happy to open up to the floor for any questions and answers.
So I work in a distributed company as well. Thank you. Hello. So I work in a distributed organization structure where the team that we work in San Francisco is the satellite office, and the parent company has about 250 employees. And the general work culture there is you speak face to face. So what sort of processes would you recommend, given the fact that the norm to work is to talk to each other face to face, and here you have people who are in remote offices who oftentimes can't hear a thing on what's happening, even though we have the best, we've got Zoom, things pick up, but people keep forgetting. And it becomes tiring as the satellite office to keep reminding people that, hey, we're here, we're on the call, please don't forget that, that you need to be able to speak up. What sort of ideas do you have to be able to make sure that there's that shift in mindset, given the fact that we are the minority, and the main company is actually, used to a completely different culture?
One thing that comes to mind, which is a little bit more work for your team, so I'm sorry, but over-communicating successes, over-communicating, events that happen in the office, it's just a way to sort of position yourselves as equals. I do think that there are probably other ways to think about, better convincing the primary office, to integrate you. But, just thinking about it from your perspective, I think it goes both ways, because there's probably a lot of outbound communication coming from the other office. But, don't feel try not to feel like that office, which I know is hard.
I mean, maybe another angle is, I wonder, when I hear about that, whether leadership I bought in, is leadership setting the best example? So like I said, some of the things we try to do is, if it is truly a global context, we run our meetings in a certain way where the interaction is normalized. It's not like if you sit in a particular location, then it's sort of a face-to-face communication, and then everybody else is cut out. There is ways where you can normalize some of that. And I think it starts with leadership. If leadership is not setting an example, then why should everybody else do?